In the farthest part of the galaxy, where stars looked like cold fire and silence ruled the black void, lived a peaceful race known as the Valari. They were gentle people, elegant and intelligent, who had built shining cities floating above blue oceans and silver mountains. For centuries they lived without war, without greed, and without fear. But there was one name that always brought unease to their hearts: humans. They called them the Deathworlders, a word that carried both horror and mystery. Stories about humans were told in low voices. Children were warned that if they ever traveled too far into the stars, they might meet one of them. Creatures born on a planet so dangerous that everything tried to kill them, even their own world. To the Valari, humans were monsters who survived storms that could tear cities apart, who lived with volcanoes, diseases, and beasts stronger than metal. They were the nightmare of peace-loving species. For years, the Valari avoided the human systems. They refused trade, ignored diplomatic offers, and erased every human transmission that came through their networks. They wanted nothing to do with them. Let the Deathworlders stay in their chaos, their elders said, while we remain safe in our light. It worked for generations. The Valari grew prosperous, their culture blossomed, and their technology reached new heights. They believed nothing could break their peace. Then came the plague. It started as a faint shimmer in the air of a farming colony. Crops began to rot overnight. Machines failed without warning. People who worked the fields fell sick, coughing light and bleeding crystal dust. At first, the Valari scientists believed it was a chemical fault. But soon, every colony, every planet, and every ship that received supplies from that system showed the same signs. It spread faster than any disease they had known. Within weeks, half their population was infected. Whole cities were locked down. Ships were grounded. Fear replaced the calm of their once happy world. The Valari High Council held meeting after meeting, searching for answers. Their best doctors worked without rest, but the disease seemed to change every time they tried to fight it. Every cure failed. Every attempt to control it only made things worse. It destroyed their technology, corrupted their atmosphere systems, and poisoned their food supplies. What began as a sickness became a slow destruction of their civilization. Power grids failed, communication towers went silent, and the once bright Valari worlds dimmed into darkness. They reached out to their allies, or those they thought were allies. The neighboring systems, who had once celebrated trade and art with them, now refused their calls. Their ships were banned from docking. Their distress signals were blocked. The Valari were trapped in their own space, dying and alone. Every day, more families vanished into the growing silence. In the council chambers, the debates grew desperate. The young scientists demanded to send a message to the Deathworlders. They had heard rumors that humans had faced plagues worse than this and survived. But the older leaders refused. "You would call the monsters upon us?" they argued. "Do you wish to invite extinction? If they come, they will not heal us, they will conquer us. They will turn our world into another one of their death worlds." The younger voices fought back. "If we do nothing, we will die anyway," one scientist cried. "At least if they come, we have a chance." But fear ruled the room. The humans were a name spoken with trembling lips. The thought of their rough, scarred faces and strange, warlike eyes haunted the Valari imagination. Legend said they had wiped out entire enemy fleets in ancient wars, that they lived in storms and smiled through pain. No gentle species could understand that kind of creature, but time was running out. The plague grew stronger. Whole sectors went silent. Even the mighty capital of Valara Prime lost its power grid. Hospitals overflowed. Families burned their homes to stop the spread, but it didn't help. The skies filled with ash from funeral fires that never stopped. The sound of crying echoed through the once busy markets. The Valari had never known despair like this. One night, a group of younger leaders gathered in secret under the Great Hall of Science. There were no lights, only the faint glow of broken screens and dying data crystals. They were tired, hungry, and scared, but they were the last who still believed in hope. A woman named Lyra, a communications expert, stood and said quietly, "We have one last chance. The humans." The room went silent. No one moved. The very word carried the weight of centuries of fear. Lyra continued, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "Yes, they are dangerous. Yes, they are violent. But they are alive when others would be dead. They endure everything. We need that kind of strength now. If we don't call them, there will be no Valari left to fear them." There was a long pause. Then one by one the others nodded. They didn't have permission from the council, but it no longer mattered. Their leaders were hiding, their cities were falling, and their people were dying. Someone had to act. With trembling fingers, Lyra typed the emergency transmission code, an ancient galactic frequency used only for absolute distress. Her message was simple: a cry for help, a signal of extinction. "This is the Valari civilization," she said softly into the recorder. "We are dying. If anyone can hear this, Gwen, if you have the power to help, please answer. We have no one else." When the message was sent, silence followed. The transmission vanished into the endless night between stars. The Valari stared at their screens, waiting for a reply that might never come. Days passed, then weeks. Some began to lose hope again. Maybe the humans had heard and ignored them. Maybe they thought the Valari were already dead, or maybe the humans didn't care. But deep down, Lyra believed something different. She had read about humans, studied their history. They were strange creatures who fought wars, yes, but also built hospitals in the middle of battlefields. They could be cruel, but also incredibly kind. They didn't run from danger, they faced it. She whispered to herself, "If they hear us, they will come." And so the Valari waited. On darkened planets, under flickering skies, families gathered near broken communication screens, hoping to see a signal, any sign, that someone had heard their cry. In every home, every shelter, people prayed in silence, not to their gods, but to fate itself. They had done something unthinkable. They had called the Deathworlders, but in their hearts, even through the fear, a tiny spark of hope began to burn. Maybe the stories were wrong. Maybe the monsters weren't monsters after all. Maybe, just maybe, the beings they feared most would be the only ones strong enough to save them. That night, the stars above Valara Prime seemed to flicker brighter, as if the universe itself had heard their desperate plea. They didn't know it yet, but far across the black ocean of space, powerful machines were coming to life. Deep within human space, alarms were sounding, coordinates were being locked, and engines were roaring awake. Humanity, the Deathworlders, had received the signal, and they were coming. The Valari waited in silence after sending their desperate SOS. Days turned into weeks, and the light of hope that had once shone in their hearts began to fade again. The plague still spread across their worlds. Factories had stopped working, and even the stars seemed dimmer through the poisoned skies. People whispered about the message they had sent, the message to the humans. Some still believed it was madness. Others prayed it would save them. But no one knew if it had even been received. In the darkness of their dying cities, the Valari could only wait. Lyra, the woman who had sent the signal, barely slept. She stayed in the old communications center, staring at the long-range sensors. Every time a light flickered on the screen, her heart jumped, only to fall again when it turned out to be debris or static. "They're not coming," one of her colleagues said softly one night. "Maybe they don't care. Maybe they think we're already dead." Lyra didn't answer. She simply looked out the window, up at the stars that had once filled her with wonder, and whispered, "They will come." Then, one cold morning, everything changed. It started with a sound, a low, steady hum that filled the sky. People ran out into the streets, confused. The clouds were glowing faintly, as if lightning was trapped inside them. The hum grew louder, deeper, until it shook the ground beneath their feet. Soldiers rushed to defense stations. The old orbital sensors, long silent, began flashing warnings. The sky above Valara Prime split open in lines of blue and white light. Something massive was coming through hyperspace. Many screamed in fear. "It's them!" someone cried. "The Deathworlders!" Dozens of enormous ships appeared one after another, their metal hulls dark and scarred from battles fought in unknown wars. The Valari had seen fleets before, trade convoys, science vessels, even defense cruisers, but never anything like this. The human ships were colossal, built for survival, not beauty. Their designs were harsh, purposeful, and terrifying. They moved with the slow, powerful grace of beasts that feared nothing in the universe. Panic spread through the Valari capital. Civil defense alarms wailed through the cities. Some thought the humans had come to conquer, not to save. Entire neighborhoods fled underground, while military commanders shouted orders that no one could follow. They had no weapons strong enough to resist. "We should never have called them," one officer shouted in terror. "They've come to finish us." From orbit, the human fleet looked like a storm of metal and fire. Hundreds of smaller ships fanned out around the main carriers. Every alien world that had ever fought humans had spoken of their terrifying efficiency, and now the Valari were seeing it for themselves. The sight was both beautiful and horrifying, a display of unstoppable power. But then something strange happened. No weapons were fired, no cities were attacked. The human ships simply stopped. They formed a calm, perfect formation in orbit and began broadcasting a message. The Valari translators worked frantically to decode the human language. The voice that came through the speakers was deep and calm. To the people of Valara Prime, it said, "We received your distress call. We come not for war but for aid. We are here to help you survive. Remain where you are. Relief operations will begin immediately." For several seconds there was total silence. The Valari could hardly believe what they had heard. The same humans they had feared for centuries were offering to help. Some thought it was a trick, that the humans were trying to gain their trust before taking control. But when the first human dropships entered the atmosphere, carrying not bombs but supplies, their doubts began to break. Through the thick clouds, thousands of smaller craft descended from orbit. They weren't sleek or elegant like Valari ships. They were armored, rough, and built to endure anything. They landed in ruined cities, on hospital rooftops, in fields covered with dead crops. From inside came humans in heavy protective suits. Their helmets glowed faintly, their armor marked with strange symbols and names. They looked exactly like the monsters from the old stories, tall, scarred, and powerful. But they carried no weapons. Instead, they brought crates of medicine, food, and machines that hummed softly with energy. When the first Valari saw them up close, they trembled. The humans looked fierce, their movements strong and purposeful, their eyes sharp. One human took off his helmet, revealing a face worn by battle but calm with kindness. "It's safe now," he said softly. "We're here to help." The Valari around him froze. They had never imagined that such a terrifying creature could speak so gently. Within hours, the humans set up relief zones across the planet. Massive generators restored power to hospitals. Drones flew overhead, spraying cleansing chemicals that neutralized the plague spores. Human doctors and scientists began working side by side with Valari researchers, studying the sickness, creating cures, and building new systems to filter the air and water. The Valari watched in awe. The humans worked like machines. They didn't rest. They didn't complain. They moved through areas filled with radiation and disease as if it were nothing. Their bodies, hardened by the dangers of their homeworld, allowed them to do what no Valari could. At first, many Valari were too afraid to go near them. They watched from a distance as the humans built camps and delivered supplies. But slowly, curiosity began to replace fear. A group of Valari children approached a human medic one afternoon, watching as he used strange tools to fix a damaged drone. The medic smiled, handed one of the children a small light, and said, "Here, hold this for me." The child hesitated, then took it. The human nodded approvingly. "Good job," he said. That tiny moment of trust spread faster than any rumor. News traveled quickly. People began to speak differently about the Deathworlders. They were still powerful, still strange, but they weren't the destroyers the legends had described. They were saviors, beings who faced danger not to conquer but to help. On other Valari worlds, similar scenes unfolded. Human ships arrived with food and energy cells. Their massive cargo bays opened to release hundreds of drones that built shelters in minutes. The plague, which had seemed unstoppable, finally met something stronger: human determination. Still, not everyone trusted them. In the Valari council chambers, some leaders argued that this was all a strategy. "They will help us now," one elder said bitterly, "and later they will demand our worlds." But Lyra, who had first sent the SOS, spoke up. "Do you really think creatures like them need to trick us? If they wanted our world, they could take it. But they didn't. They saved it." Her words silenced the room. Outside, human and Valari scientists stood together, watching as the sky slowly cleared. The dark clouds that had covered Valara Prime for months began to break apart, revealing sunlight for the first time in weeks. People wept openly in the streets. For the first time in generations, the Valari looked at humans not with fear, but with awe. Above the planet, the human flagship, the UNS Resolute, continued to coordinate relief across the system. Admiral Hayes, the commander of the fleet, watched from the observation deck as reports came in. His officers told him that several Valari colonies were stable again. The plague was being contained. He nodded silently. Good, he said. We finish what we start. No one gets left behind. Back on the surface, Lyra received a message from the humans inviting her to meet the Admiral aboard the flagship. As she stood before the towering human officers, she felt small and fragile, but the warmth in their eyes surprised her. Admiral Hayes greeted her with a respectful nod. You were the one who sent the signal, he said. You made the right call. Lyra smiled faintly, her eyes wet. We thought you would come to destroy us, she admitted. The Admiral gave a soft laugh. Destroy you? No, we've done enough of that in our history. Now we try to build instead. When she returned to her people, Lyra told them everything she had seen. The fear that once surrounded the humans was breaking apart, just like the clouds above. The Valari finally began to believe that maybe the universe was not as cruel as they thought. They had sent their cry for help into the void, expecting silence or death. Instead, the Deathworlders had answered, not with weapons, but with open hands. The beings they feared most had come, and they brought salvation. When the humans arrived, everything about them seemed impossible to the Valari. They came from the stars like a storm, their ships covered with battle scars, their machines so powerful that even the Valari's strongest scanners couldn't measure them. But instead of bringing war, the humans brought hope. Slowly, their vast fleet began to organize into smaller groups. Ships peeled away and spread across the Valari system. Their actions were calm and precise, almost mechanical, as if every human knew exactly what to do. The Valari watched from their cities in awe and confusion. They had never seen a race so focused, so fearless. Human landing crafts came down through the atmosphere in waves. From above, they looked like falling stars, glowing orange as they entered the clouds. The Valari who saw it felt both terror and wonder. They hid behind walls and windows, not knowing whether to run or to pray. But when the dropships landed, no weapons came out. Only people in strange, thick suits. The humans looked different from anything the Valari had seen before. Their bodies were heavier, their skin came in many shades, and their eyes carried a strange fire. Their suits were bulky and built for war zones, with glowing visors and thick armor. The first thing they did after landing was to open large metal containers filled with food, medicine, and small machines that the Valari couldn't even name. There was no shouting, no threat. They moved with quiet confidence, working in teams, setting up camps and hospitals in places that had once been filled with disease and death. The Valari, too afraid to approach, watched from a distance. One of the human commanders removed his helmet, letting the Valari see his face. His skin was marked with old scars and his eyes were sharp yet calm. He raised one hand slowly in what looked like a gesture of peace. We are here to help, he said through a translator. No weapons, no conquest, only aid. His voice was deep and steady, the kind of voice that made even the air feel safe. For a moment, no one moved. Then an old Valari doctor stepped forward. He was trembling, his four-fingered hand shaking as he asked, You can stop this sickness? The human smiled gently and nodded. We can try, and we will not stop until we do. From that moment, everything began to change. Human doctors began to work side by side with Valari healers. They brought machines that could clean poisoned air and water, drones that could carry tons of supplies through broken cities, and medicines that could fight off infections within hours. They even brought something the Valari had never seen before: human strength. The Valari were physically fragile. Their world had been gentle for millions of years. Humans, by contrast, were built from struggle. Their muscles, their lungs, even their hearts seemed made for endurance. They worked for hours without rest, lifting fallen beams, carrying heavy generators, repairing damaged structures as if it were nothing. The most astonishing thing was how they faced danger without hesitation. The plague zones were still deadly. The air was toxic and the ground was unstable. Even the Valari machines couldn't operate there. But humans walked into those zones as if they were walking through rain. Their bodies, hardened by the harsh world they came from, resisted the poison longer than any Valari could. Some got sick, but they didn't stop. They simply took medicine, rested for a few minutes, and went back to work. The Valari started calling them the Unbroken. The name spread quickly among the survivors. People began to come out of hiding to help. Where once there had been fear and silence, now there was movement, life, and purpose. In one city, a massive hospital was on the edge of collapse. Its supports were cracked, and inside were hundreds of patients who couldn't be moved. The Valari engineers said it was too dangerous to enter, But a group of human soldiers walked in without hesitation. They carried metal braces, welding tools, and portable shields. Within hours, they reinforced the structure, working in the heat and smoke until their armor was scorched. One Valari scientist watching them whispered, "They are not afraid of death." A human standing nearby heard and replied softly, "We are. But fear doesn't stop us. The humans didn't just save lives, they changed minds." The Valari had always thought humans were monsters of violence, but now they saw something else. Compassion hidden beneath that strength. The humans laughed, shared their food, and listened. They fixed machines, told jokes, and taught Valari children how to use simple tools. Their rough, battle-scarred hands built shelters and healed wounds. The Valari began to understand that humans were not cruel because they wanted to be. They were strong because they had to be. One night, Lyra, the communications expert who had first sent the SOS, visited a human camp. She found a group of soldiers sitting around a small fire, cooking something that smelled strange but warm. They invited her to sit. She hesitated but then joined them. "You are not what we thought," she said quietly. A young human smiled. "What did you think we were?" Lyra lowered her eyes. "Destroyers. Beasts from a world of death," the soldier laughed softly. "That's not wrong," he said. "Our world is cruel, but it taught us one thing, how to survive. And when you know how to survive, you learn how to help others survive too." As days turned into weeks, more human fleets arrived. Giant orbital hospitals floated above Valari Prime, their white hulls shining like new moons. Massive drones descended to clear debris and rebuild cities. Human scientists worked tirelessly to study the plague. They discovered that it was a mutating nanovirus, something that evolved faster than normal medicine could stop. It had been born from an industrial accident long ago, a product of the Valari's own machines. The humans began building a vaccine in secret labs aboard their ships. When it was ready, they distributed it freely across every Valari world. Slowly, the plague began to fade. The sickness that had once consumed entire cities was finally being defeated. The Valari celebrated cautiously at first, then with growing joy. For the first time in months, music returned to the air. Lights glowed in the streets again. Children played outside, laughing as human soldiers watched with quiet smiles. The humans didn't stay to celebrate. They simply kept working. The Valari noticed that humans never seemed to rest for long. Even when the work was done, they prepared for more. They were always ready, always alert. When asked why, one human engineer simply said, "Because peace never lasts, and someone has to be ready when it breaks." The Valari didn't understand fully, but they respected it. Not everything was easy. Some Valari still feared that the humans might take control of their worlds once the crisis ended. A few even plotted to restrict their access, but when they saw human doctors treating their people without asking for payment or reward, even the most doubtful hearts began to soften. The humans didn't demand anything. They didn't ask for land, money, or tribute. They only said, "You called for help. We came." That's enough. Everywhere the humans went, they left behind something unexpected. Not just rebuilt cities or cured diseases, but a new way of thinking. They taught the Valari that strength and kindness could exist together, that survival didn't have to mean cruelty, and that fear could be replaced by courage. One evening, as the twin suns of Valara Prime set behind the rebuilt skyline, Lyra looked up at the human ships glittering like stars. She thought about the first time she had sent that desperate message, believing it would bring destruction. Instead, it had brought salvation. She whispered softly to herself, "We feared them because we didn't understand them." Far above, aboard the UNS Resolute, Admiral Hayes watched the reports coming in. The Valari system was stabilizing. His officers looked to him for the next command. "Begin withdrawal procedures," he said. "Leave the supplies and tech behind. They'll need them." One officer asked, "Sir, what should we tell them when they ask why we helped?" Hayes looked out at the stars for a moment and said, "Because we could." As the night fell, the Valari looked up and saw the human fleet glowing in orbit, silent and strong. The beings they had feared most were now their protectors, their saviors. The humans were everything the stories had said. Unstoppable, unbreakable, and forged by a deadly world. But the Valari finally understood the truth behind their strength. The Deathworlders had come, and they had not brought death. They had brought life. Even after weeks of help and recovery, fear still lived quietly inside the hearts of the Valari. They were grateful, yes, but they could not forget the old stories. stories that painted humans as destroyers, as children of chaos. The Valari were a gentle people who avoided conflict for thousands of years, and the humans seemed to be born from everything they had always feared. The humans were strong, too strong. They could breathe air filled with toxins, walk through fire, lift things no Valari could move, and stay awake for days without rest. To the Valari, that kind of power was unnatural. It was terrifying, but the humans never used that power to harm. They helped, they built, and they protected. They worked alongside the Valari scientists, teaching them how to purify their atmosphere and stabilize their energy grids. They taught without pride, without expecting worship or reward. Yet still, whispers filled the cities. Whispers that maybe the humans were pretending to be kind until they controlled everything. Lyra saw this fear every day. When she walked through the rebuilt streets, she could see how Valari parents pulled their children closer when humans passed by. She could feel the tension in meetings, the way Valari officials avoided direct contact. "They think we are their saviors," one human engineer said quietly one night. "But they also think we are their future conquerors." Lyra wanted to change that. She wanted her people to understand what she had already seen, that humans were not monsters. They were survivors, and survival had taught them empathy in a way no peaceful world ever could. One day, a violent storm hit Valara Prime. It came from the northern seas, where the atmosphere had been unstable since the plague. The wind screamed across the cities, tearing apart rooftops and flooding the lower districts. The Valari emergency systems were still weak, and many shelters failed. Panic spread quickly as families ran into the streets. Human aid teams immediately moved out to help even before Valari leaders gave orders. The storm raged for hours. Floods swallowed homes. Lightning burned through buildings and people were trapped under debris. The humans worked through it all. They moved through the water, carrying Valari children on their shoulders. They lifted broken beams with their bare hands and pulled survivors from the wreckage. The Valari watched in disbelief as these strange beings faced nature itself without hesitation. In one sector, a massive energy tower began to collapse. Hundreds of Valari workers were still trapped inside. Valari commanders begged the humans not to enter. "The structure will fall," they warned. "You'll die." But a squad of human soldiers ignored the warnings. Their leader, a woman named Captain Amina Reyes, shouted back, "Then we'll die saving them." She and her team ran into the collapsing building as the wind howled around them. The tower fell minutes later. When the storm finally passed, silence fell across the ruined city. The Valari search teams dug through the wreckage with trembling hands, fearing the worst. But then through the smoke and dust, a figure appeared, Captain Reyes, covered in ash and blood, carrying a Valari child in her arms. Behind her came her team, all wounded but alive, guiding dozens of Valari survivors out of the ruins. When she finally collapsed from exhaustion, the Valari gathered around her. One of them whispered, voice breaking, "She risked her life." For us, that moment changed everything. The story of Captain Reyes spread across the planet within hours. People who once whispered in fear now spoke with tears in their eyes. For the first time, they saw humans not as Deathworlders, but as protectors. In the days that followed, something beautiful began to happen. Valari and humans started working together naturally, without walls between them. The Valari soldiers, once afraid to even speak to human officers, began volunteering to join their missions. They watched how the humans operated, disciplined, calm, united, and they wanted to learn. The humans didn't treat them like students or weaklings. They treated them as equals, guiding them with patience and respect. A Valari general named Theron, who had once argued against the SOS signal, met Admiral Hayes personally. He admitted his mistake. "We thought your kind would bring fire and conquest," he said. "But you brought light instead." Admiral Hayes simply nodded. "Our world made us hard," he said quietly. "But it also made us understand what suffering feels like. We don't want anyone else to live through it." Slowly, trust began to grow, not because of words, but because of actions. Humans never stopped helping. They worked even when no one watched. They shared their technology, repaired what they could, and taught the Valari how to maintain it themselves. They refused any kind of payment. "You don't owe us," they always said. "Just help the next ones who need it." The Valari children were the first to truly lose their fear. They would run up to humans in the streets, curious about their tools and armor. The soldiers often let them touch their helmets or play with the small robots they carried. Laughter, once a sound of the past began to echo through the cities again. In the capital, Lyra was invited to speak at a council gathering with both Valerie and human leaders present. She stood before them, her voice trembling but clear. "We feared them," she said. "We thought their strength was a threat. But now I see it clearly. Their strength is what makes their kindness possible. They are not Deathworlders. They are life-bringers." Her words were met with quiet at first, then applause, hesitant but real. Outside the chambers, a small memorial was built for Captain Reyes and her team. She survived but was in recovery aboard a human ship. The Valari sculpted a monument in the city square, a tall figure of two hands, one human and one Valari, holding each other amid broken stone. Below it were carved the words, "Fear ended when courage walked among us." In the following weeks, mixed teams of humans and Valerie began patrolling together to rebuild destroyed colonies. The Valari learned quickly. They admired the humans' discipline and adaptability. Humans, in return, were amazed by the Valari's intelligence and precision. Together, they accomplished what neither could do alone. One night, after a long day of rebuilding, Lyra sat with Admiral Hayes on the balcony of the new council tower. The stars stretched endlessly above them.
"When we sent that message," she said softly, "we thought we were calling our own destruction." Hayes smiled faintly.
"Most people do the first time they meet us." Lyra looked at him curiously. "Why did you come then? Why risk so much for strangers who feared you?" The Admiral's eyes grew distant. "Because once, a long time ago, we sent our own cry for help. No one answered. We swore we'd never let that happen to anyone else." His words stayed with her long after he left. That night, Lyra walked through the city and saw humans and Valari eating together in open markets. She saw laughter between species that had once been divided by fear. The humans didn't seem like visitors anymore. They felt like part of something bigger, a shared story written by courage and trust. Even the Valari media, which once avoided showing humans on screen, began sharing stories of their heroism. There were images of human engineers rebuilding bridges, doctors saving lives, soldiers helping old Valari walk through ruined streets. The people who had once trembled at the sight of human ships now stood outside to wave at them as they passed overhead. The most emotional moment came when Captain Reyes finally recovered enough to walk again. The Valari gathered in the city square to greet her. As she stood before the monument built in her honor, she looked uncomfortable. "You shouldn't have made this for me," she said. "We just did what needed to be done." Lyra smiled gently. "Yes," she replied, "but sometimes doing what needs to be done is what makes heroes." That day, something truly changed inside the Valari people. Their fear had been replaced with respect, their doubt with gratitude. The word Deathworlder, which once meant terror, now meant something else entirely, a name spoken with honor. The Valari learned that true strength doesn't destroy. It protects. True courage doesn't roar. It endures quietly in the darkest hour. From then on, the humans were no longer outsiders. They were friends, teachers, and guardians. The Valari understood that the universe was not divided into weak and strong, but into those who help and those who turn away. And when the next storm came, be it plague, war, or chaos, they knew one thing with certainty: they would never face it alone again. Years passed after the day the Valari and humans stood side by side against the storm. The world that was once broken began to heal. The cities that had been filled with silence and fear now buzzed with the sound of life. The skies, once gray with pollution and fire, were now clearer than anyone could remember. But the biggest change wasn't in the land. It was in the hearts of the Valari. They had learned something they could never forget: that true courage is not born from strength alone, but from compassion. Humans continued to live among them, not as conquerors, but as companions. They didn't take control or demand anything in return. They simply worked, rebuilding, teaching, and protecting. It became normal to see human engineers working alongside Valari scientists, human soldiers walking through Valari streets with laughter and friendship. The fear that had once filled every corner of Valara Prime had slowly melted away, replaced by trust and deep respect. Lyra often walked through the new capital, where children of both species played together under the glass domes. She would stop and watch them, small Valari kids chasing human children, their laughter echoing through the air. That sound had once been rare, almost forgotten. But now it was everywhere. She knew then that the fear was truly gone. One evening, as the twin moons of Valara rose over the horizon, the sky lit up with a familiar flash, the glow of incoming ships. The people gathered to watch. It wasn't an invasion or a rescue fleet this time. It was a convoy of transport vessels carrying supplies and people, both human and Valari, headed to rebuild colonies in other parts of the galaxy. They called it the Unity Expedition. This mission was unlike any other. It wasn't led by one species. It was a joint effort, humans and Valari working together to help other struggling worlds. What began as a desperate SOS had turned into something far greater. The Valari, who once called for help, were now answering calls for others. Lyra was chosen to join the mission as an ambassador, representing her people. When she received the message, she stood silently for a moment, remembering that first day when she had pressed the SOS beacon, terrified and alone. Now she was part of the very fleet she had once feared. Before leaving, she visited Admiral Hayes, who was preparing to retire. He looked older, his face lined from years of service, but his eyes still carried that same calm strength. "You taught us something," Lyra told him softly. "You showed us that fear can be defeated not by force but by kindness." Hayes smiled gently. "No," he said, "you taught yourselves. We only reminded you that hope is worth fighting for." As the fleet prepared to depart, the spaceport was filled with people, Valari, humans, and even representatives from other species who had come to witness the moment. The Valari president gave a short speech, her voice steady with pride. "Years ago," she said, "we feared the Deathworlders, but today they are our brothers and sisters in arms. Together we are no longer survivors of the past. We are builders of the future." The fleet rose into the stars, engines glowing like streaks of light across the sky. On board the lead ship, Lyra looked out from the observation deck. The stars shimmered beyond the glass, endless and beautiful. She could see Valara Prime shrinking behind them, a shining blue world filled with life and hope. Beside her stood a young human pilot smiling. "Hard to believe your people once feared us, huh?" he said. Lyra smiled back. "No," she replied. "It's easy to believe. What's hard to believe is that we ever survived without you." Their mission took them to distant worlds. They landed on planets scarred by war, disease, and famine, places that reminded Lyra of her own world years ago. Each time they arrived, she watched the same pattern unfold. The sight of human ships would first cause panic. Locals would hide or flee just as the Valari once did. But then when they saw how humans worked, how they helped the wounded, repaired broken systems, and stayed until the job was done, their fear began to fade. One day, while working on a desert planet called Terran 9, a group of local leaders approached Lyra. They had seen the humans rebuilding hospitals and cleaning the poisoned rivers. One of them asked her quietly, "Aren't you afraid of them?" Lyra smiled. "I used to be," she said. "But fear doesn't last long when you see who they really are." That simple answer seemed to calm them more than any speech could. Weeks turned into months, and the fleet became a symbol across the galaxy, a sign of hope. People began to call it the Alliance of the Light. The humans, once known as Deathworlders, were now known as the Protectors. The name spread across hundreds of systems, whispered with gratitude. Humanity, who had once been feared and isolated, was now welcomed with open arms. Meanwhile, back on Valara Prime, life continued to thrive. New schools opened where children of different species learned together. Art and music flourished again. Valari songs began to include human instruments, and human stories were told in Valari theaters. It was as if two civilizations had begun to blend, creating something new, something stronger. Lyra sometimes received messages from home, videos showing streets lit with festivals, Valari dancing alongside humans in colorful lights. It filled her heart with warmth. She often replayed them before sleeping, smiling softly as she drifted into dreams filled with stars and laughter. But one night, during a deep space mission, their fleet picked up a distress signal, a faint SOS, weak but real. It came from a small mining colony on the edge of known space. The transmission was full of static, but a few words were clear. "Please, anyone, help us." The crew immediately changed course. Lyra stood on the bridge, feeling a chill of recognition. It sounded exactly like her own message from years ago. She whispered, History repeats itself. The human captain beside her nodded. Then we'll make sure it repeats the right way. When they arrived, they found the colony in chaos. Fires burning, structures collapsing, and frightened civilians running for shelter. Without hesitation, humans and Valari rushed to help. The sight of armored figures moving through the smoke terrified the colonists at first. Some hid behind walls, thinking they were under attack. But then they saw the same thing Lyra once did. The way humans carried the injured. The way they worked together silently. The way they never hesitated to put themselves in danger to save another. Hours later, when the fires were finally out, the colonists gathered in the open, staring at their rescuers. A young girl walked forward, her small hands trembling. She looked up at Lyra and whispered, "Who are you people?" Lyra smiled gently and said, "We're the ones who came when you called." The girl smiled back, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." That simple moment reminded Lyra of everything, of fear, of courage, of humanity. She realized that what had begun as a desperate cry for help had become something far greater, a chain of compassion that would never end. One world helped another, which helped another, spreading light where there had once been darkness. When the fleet finally returned to Valara Prime, they were met with celebration. The skies were filled with lights and the people sang songs of unity. Lyra stood once again beside Admiral Hayes, who had come out of retirement just to witness it. "You see," he said softly, "this is how it should have been all along. Not one world fearing another, but many worlds standing together." Lyra nodded. "And it all started with fear," she said. "Fear brought us together. Maybe that's the secret, that even fear can be turned into hope if we face it." The Admiral looked at her, his eyes proud. "Then you've learned the hardest lesson of all." That night, as the celebration filled the air, Lyra walked alone to the monument, the one built for Captain Reyes years ago. The two hands, human and Valari, still stood strong, shining under the starlight. She touched the stone gently and whispered, "We kept your promise. We made the fear end." In the distance, she could see the stars glowing brighter, one by one, as if the universe itself was waking up to a new dawn. The humans were no longer the monsters of old stories. They were legends now, not for their power, but for their hearts. And so the story of the Deathworlders, the ones who were once feared, became a story of unity and compassion told across galaxies. It began with a cry for help, and it ended with countless voices across countless worlds saying the same words. When we called, humanity answered.